Let's speak further about Venezuela. Catherine Royle is a former British ambassador to Venezuela and is now principal of Somerville College in Oxford and joins me now. Catherine, thank you very much for joining us. Much appreciated. Can I ask you, firstly, were you surprised yesterday when you learned that the US had launched airstrikes but also captured President Maduro?
Yes, I mean, it was quite an extraordinary operation, wasn't it? I mean, in military terms, we heard what a tremendous success it was. But I mean, in political terms, it's everyone has the same feeling, which is that they've managed to do this. But what next? What comes after this? And I think those of us, because I was also a diplomat in Afghanistan, and I can't help feeling that here we go again. This is a plan that's gone on and without a plan for the day after.
We've heard from Venezuelans living in the UK this morning, many of whom do not like, I mean, to put it completely bluntly and almost understating it, President Maduro, and they're very pleased he is no longer there. Can this be summed up, though, as an oil-rich idea, in your view, Catherine?
Well, I think it's really quite complicated, isn't it? Because when we saw the press conference yesterday from Mar-a-Lago, we heard two different stories. We heard Rubio saying very clearly this was a law enforcement mission, and this was about going in and taking out somebody who they had indicted on drug charges. And then President Trump started speaking, and he said something really completely different about how the US is going to run Venezuela and the oil companies are going to go in there. And you heard from one of your callers earlier about just how difficult it would be to put the Venezuelan oil company PDVSA back on its feet and producing, because its decline is not recent. It's it's a couple of decades. So I don't think we quite know what the policy is, because we heard two different things in the same press conference.
It's long been a campaign by Rubio, as you mentioned. This is Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, regarding Venezuela. And you do get the sense, in order to persuade Donald Trump of his thinking, the idea of oil might have sort of had to come into it. What do you think, in terms of international law, this holds much truck, Catherine?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I mean, I think you've got, again, a very interesting contrast where the precedents that have been set by the US going as far back as Panama in 1989, the US has sort of given itself, or given the president the powers to do this. Now, if you're asking about the UN Charter, then clearly it's absolutely against the UN Charter. So again, you have this slightly strange situation where the US will say that they were acting legally, and the rest of the world will say that this is not in accordance with international law.
What is it like, Venezuela? Because we hear all of these stories. You're obviously a very senior diplomat there. When you were ambassador, you would have dealt with Chavez, given the years you were in, 2007 to 2010, Hugo Chavez. I just wonder any reflections you have of working there and dealing with that regime.
I mean, it was an extraordinarily challenging thing to do, because actually one of the key moments in Venezuela was in 2002, because that was the moment when a coup was launched against Hugo Chavez, and the Americans sort of welcomed it incredibly quickly, and most of the rest of the world just sort of hung on and waited to see what happened. And sort of 36 hours after the coup, Chavez was back in power. And what happened then, and I'm not suggesting that the Americans were involved in the coup, I have absolutely no idea whether they were or not. But the problem was that gave the Russians, the Cubans in particular, the Iranians, they all sort of went up to Chavez afterwards and said, we told you the Americans wouldn't let you run Venezuela, and that they would be back up to their old tricks. And that was how they got themselves their foot in the door. And Chavez stopped being a guy who had very good relationships. He came to Britain on a guest of government visit, met the Queen, who he loved. It stopped him being a sort of Blairite, Schroederite, third way kind of guy, and turned him into somebody who was a client of the Cubans, the Iranians, the Russians. And so, there are sort of things in Venezuela's past that make this an incredibly complicated story. Chavez himself was incredibly charismatic. I mean, it was very difficult not to like him. You might not have agreed with him, but he was absolutely amazing as a person. And the following he had was quite something to see. Maduro was foreign minister at that time, so I knew him as well, and clearly had none of the sort of gifts of his boss. Delcy Rodriguez, I also knew, and Delcy is a very smart woman, and we will see what happens. Very interesting to see Trump say that it will be her that runs the place. I think we have no idea what's going to happen in the next few days.
Just to remind listeners, Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president under Maduro, who now it seems has taken up the mantle, although we're not entirely sure. What of opposition parties? We hear a lot about Maria Corina Machado, who was given the Nobel Peace Prize, pipped Trump to the post and also congratulated him. I thought Donald Trump, interesting in the press conference yesterday, in his interview with Fox News, sort of cooled on the idea that he would sort of install her in some way as president. Were you surprised by that?
Well, there was no suggestion of elections happening or sort of a rerun of that. I don't think the word democracy was actually mentioned in that press conference. I was listening out for it. I didn't hear it. Now maybe I missed it, but there was no sort of discussion about a return to democracy. And then, as you say, he was incredibly dismissive of Maria Corina Machado. Now, Edmundo González, who was her candidate, is in Spain. He left the country after the election was declared as a Maduro victory, which it obviously wasn't, and is said to be quite unwell. So I'm not sure that he will be involved. And as you say, Machado, who knows?
Can I ask you about the UK response? It seems to be Keir Starmer sort of damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. There are all people who want him to have his Hugh Grant Love Actually moment where he sort of stands up to Donald Trump, and then there's others who are saying he should go completely the other way. Do you understand why he's having to walk this tightrope?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, as I said, in 2002, when the attempted coup happened on Chavez, the Americans gave a view very, very quickly, and that backfired on all of us, actually. So, that's a problem. So sometimes you need some time. And I know that everybody in this world wants a view immediately. And sometimes you just need a bit of time to see what's happening. I mean, it's quite clear that nobody has any love for Maduro himself. He stole the election. There's no doubt about that. He was incredibly corrupt. He's terribly repressive inside Venezuela. But the idea that you can go along and just remove him from office and that there are no consequences to that is pretty complicated too. So I think if you look at the statements that the EU made as well, I mean they're quite similar. Of a sort of okay, he's gone. No, we're not quite sure this was exactly what we'd have done, but let's hang on and see what happens next.
Lastly, can I ask you about the influence in the region more generally? There's been this, Donald Trump, I think, actually mentioned the Monroe Doctrine at some point during the press conference, of course, named after the former US president of the big name, saying it's a big deal, but we've superseded it by a lot. Is this really what this is about? Is this about reasserting that dominance in the Western Hemisphere, in Latin America?
Well, that's what the recent American national security strategy said. I mean, and people afterwards were joking that it's not the Monroe Doctrine now, it's the Donroe Doctrine, but we shall see. But I think I
think I know one person who was joking about that. That's the man himself.
There you go. But I mean, Rubio was asked about Cuba yesterday, and he didn't say no to the question of, is Cuba next? So, he said he thought that they should be feeling uncomfortable. So it's not very reassuring, is it? And of course, in Latin America, there are many countries who've been through this over the course of the 20th century, and will be feeling somewhat uncomfortable. It's the unpredictability of it, which I think is for all of us the difficult thing to live with. When you think you know the rules of the game, then you can do business. But when you've got a player of this capability, as we saw demonstrated in the military activity, and you don't know what they're going to do, that's pretty unnerving.
I'm really grateful for your time. Thank you. Catherine Royle is former British ambassador to Venezuela and now principal at Somerville College in Oxford.